Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. We've been having a lot of fun here recently with the Fractal Audio AX8. And before we get any more in depth with it, because we've got a lot of tone match patches coming up, we've got a bunch of tutorials, basic and advanced alike, I figured that I would go ahead and start this little series called My Top 5, which is obviously YouTuber clickbait because that's what's really big right now. But for those of you that are looking to get some quick and effective information on how to get a really good heavy metal tone on your AX8, I thought I'd go ahead and start the series off with something a little bit more technical. So today I'm going to be sharing my top 5 favorite Fractal Audio AX8 high gain metal amplifiers. So throughout this video, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to be using the same signal chain sans the amplifier. So same guitar, same drive block, and same cabinet impulse response. I will be turning the drive block on and off if the amp is tight enough to handle it without it, but other than that, it's basically going to be a apples to apples comparison between each amplifier, so you'll be able to tell exactly which one that you might want to use. So in fairness, I thought we would go in alphabetical order, so let us start with the Angle Severe 1 and 2. Those of you that are familiar with Ingle amplifiers probably already recognize this as the Ingle Savage, and the 1 and 2 is actually the same amp, just number 2 has a rough overdrive mode engaged as well as a sweep that gets rid of some of the mid frequencies. Both of those are features on the real Ingle Savage amplifier. Now, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of Ingle's stuff. I don't really like the Fireball, Powerball series of amps. I do love the Savage though, and it's one of the amps, one of the few amps in existence that I think can hold its own without needing an overdrive pedal. Now, while primarily you're going to want to use the Savage for high gain tones, it can absolutely hold its own in some older, 80s and 90s metal applications. So very versatile for what it is, especially since you have 2 separate gains to play with, but you're going to be really happy using this amp with 7 and 8 strings as well, especially if you use that low cut in conjunction with a boost pedal. I personally prefer model number 1. It does have a little bit more mids, a little more clarity to me, but they're both fantastic amplifiers, and I think that Fractal Audio absolutely nailed the modeling on this amp versus some of the real demos I've heard of the thing. So yeah, Ingle Savage, huge fan, and the Angle Severe will definitely serve the fans of that amp very well. The next amplifier will make the black metal, sludge metal, death metal, and any other type of sloppy, fast-paced metal fans out there fairly happy, I would say, because the next one is the Euro Uber, which is the model of the Bogner Ubershaw. Now, admittedly, I'm not the hugest fan of Bogner amps in general. However, the Ubershaw, I think, is the best high-gain Marshall style sound out there. A lot of people think the Bogner amps in general, especially the Ubershaw, are too dark and have way too much bass and fizz to them to be useful. But the thing is, they just dial in differently than a lot of amplifiers. They use a lot of logarithmic scale pots instead of linear. So what would be 8 or 9 on the treble scale would actually be noon on something like a Marshall Plexi circuit. So they're really not that high, bass, but you will have to spend a little bit more time dialing it in. It's not like a 5150 where you can leave everything at noon and expect to get a great sound. For my personal use cases, I like the bass cut down quite a bit, the mids to have a decent presence, treble cranked, and using an overdrive pedal with the power amps depth cranked down quite a bit will give you a really nice, smooth, and aggressive Marshall sound. They'll sound great for stuff like Behemoth, Nile, or basically any black metal, death metal type bands, and will add a very nice little European flavor to your high gain metal mix, whether it be with 6 strings, 7 strings, 8 strings, 9 strings, 5 strings, whatever you're using. It'll sound pretty great if you're looking for that Marshall type of high gain sound. Now the next 2 amps don't actually exist in real life, though if Fractal Audio put them out in tube circuits, I would probably buy them immediately because they sound so freaking good. So the first is the FAS Brutals, and if you watch the Ola England patch video, you've already heard this amp. The Brutals is a hilariously named accident. So the Brutals is actually the front end of the Soldano, the back end of the Severe, or the Savage in real life, and I believe it's the same back end as the Soldano as well. So what you get is this amazing mix match between a Mesa dual rectifier sounding amp and the Angle Severe. I'm almost said Angle Savage. I wish they would name these damn amps the same thing in real life, but I understand copyright issues. You end up with this very Fortin Natos sounding amplifier, and I was able to make it sound a lot like the Randall Satan, which is Ola England's signature amplifier, hence why we used it in that video. All around fantastic amp, and it doesn't even need an overdrive pedal to clean up and get a tight sound out of it. This thing isn't just a one-trick pony though for extended range and down-tuned guitars. It can do anything from 70s metal on up, just like the Randall Satan can. That is, of course, because it has so many options for the input, the drive, gain sections, as well as being able to mix and match power tubes to, you know, make it a little bit more like the Soldano, a little bit more like the Engel. So absolutely killer amplifier, and it is a very happy accident, as Bob Ross would say. The next FAS amp in our lineup is the Modern 3. Now the Modern 1 and 2 are 5150 type amplifiers that are basically perfected using different low pass filters and techniques that would basically be impossible or way too costly to implement in an actual production amplifier. And kind of same deal with the Modern 3, except it's the perfected dual rectifier sound. And it's hard for me to argue against that because to me it is the perfect dual rectifier sounds. Now because this amp is so good, the Recto models didn't make it on this list. There are things I don't really like about Rectos that take away from the things I do like. So the big fat bottom end that's extremely hard to dial out can be cool in certain things, but when you're already using an 8-string, it can become more of a nuisance than a helpful feature. Then you have what I think is a more squishy gain sound more than a tight crunch in a lot of times. And the Modern 3 nails those things perfectly. Whether it be a standard tuned guitar or an 8-string that is dropped down half a step, you can get an insanely tight and original sound out of the Modern 3. Sounds I've never heard before, sounds that I thought, man, this is what a dual rectifier should sound like. As far as the quintessential metal amps go, I think this is the one that ships in the AX8. It's extremely versatile. You can dial it to be about anything you want it to be in terms of the rectifier flavor of sound, and it's one that I'm using personally on a more progressive style project coming up because it is kind of more vanilla, though in this case I guess it's like the vanilla bean or French vanilla because it's perfect. There's nothing else that needs to be fixed about it. So if you're looking for that rectifier flavor of sound and you're not really happy with the other models that come pre-shipped in the box, although they are extremely accurate, they just don't sound as good to me, and you're not a fan of that, you're not a fan of the Soldanos, I would highly recommend taking a look at the Modern 3. It's a fantastic amplifier. Now for our last amplifier on this list, I think it's our only truly American amp because the Modern 3 doesn't actually exist. It's the reigning king, in my opinion, of thrash metal. That would be the USA 2C++. Obviously, it's the Mesa Boogie Mark II C++, one of the most legendary metal amps of all time, thanks to its really weird preamp section and post EQ. Unlike most amplifiers where the gain stage's distortion is basically applied to your signal immediately and then you use the EQ knobs to shape the tone, the EQ knobs on a Mark series amp are actually shaping the distortion itself. So if you have the bass at 5 o'clock, or not 5 o'clock, noon, and everything else at noon is going to sound really fat and flubby. So you're going to want to dial it down, treble cranked, and then you use the EQ afterwards, which is most of the time a 5-band Mark style EQ, which is what you're going to want to keep default. You're going to use that to get your final sound. And if you're going for the quintessential Metallica sound, you're going to want to crank that middle one extremely far down to the negative, 6 or below decibels. Now, thanks to this extremely strange but highly effective design, you're going to have to tweak with it a lot more than some other amplifiers, and it's going to take a little bit of getting used to. But the way I dial it in, it sounds amazing for southern rock type tones, and it's just an extremely versatile amp all around. Go anywhere from kind of a higher gain bluesy sound to, cutthroat Metallica and Justice for All. And it's such an amazing amp that's what they use live to this day. Now myself, I don't like to touch the EQ that's in the loop if I'm just trying to dial in my own sounds. Now if I'm doing someone else's, I'll play with it to try to nail their preferences. But this is an amplifier that you absolutely cannot get around using that 5-band EQ, which is cool. It's just a different philosophy of amplifier, but you will absolutely attain that James Hetfield crunch if you play with it long enough. So there you have it, 5 of my favorite amplifiers that ship with the AX8, and I'm sure that if you have some other similar type of amp modeler like the Kemper, that you could find similar profiles to these and be equally as happy, I would imagine, given that the quality of the competitor product. So yeah, if you have these amps in real life, I'd love to hear how you think they compare. But I'm extremely happy with the models here. This pretty much covers, I would say, 95% of the high gain type gamut that I'm looking for. And anything other than that, I could probably get extremely close with EQing and the other blocks and whatnot. So yeah, I think this thing is worth it alone for the high gain stuff, and we've not even touched a lot of the cleans. That'll do it for the inaugural episode of my top 5. If you have any other suggestions for this series or any of the AX8 series, please leave those comments below. I'll definitely get to them. And other than that, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.